I mean, so this thing provides a lot of damage. Godslayer Ground. This has, when you stun, freeze, and mobilize enemy, you deal 51% extra damage for 3 seconds. So that gives you a little bit. I have Arrayment. This gives you some glass cannon as well as just like damage on a chest piece, which is pretty rare. Normally you can only get lightning damage, I think, right? But Arrayment has quite a bit of damage on it. I use Ball Lightning Orbit with some attack speed, crit, damage. I have Chance to Slow. The Chance to Slow shouldn't be that anymore. I was using Chance to Slow as a way to try to stagger bosses a long time ago. But like, that's not a thing anymore. Should be some damage stat. A bit like Lucky Hit or something. I use Imprinted Frost Nova, gains an additional charge. It's kind of nice having 2 charges when you're like pre-stacking bosses. Also, there's something that makes it so that your Frost Nova resets charges. It doesn't reset charges, but it gains like 1 second off of cooldown. But for some reason, when you have an extra charge with this thing, it knocks a second off both of them, which just doubles the effectiveness of that. I don't know what that is. I might not even have it. It's just something I read that people were doing. And it seems okay. Otherwise, you can just use the, I mean, if you can get one, you can use the Tybalt Pants from Duriel. They have a bunch of damage when you're unstoppable. Use like Bat Unstoppable or something. I've been using Esus the entire time. I like them a lot. I think if I wasn't using Esus, I would just be using regular boots with ice armor and unstoppable. Something of that nature. Or maybe just the movement speed faster while you have unstoppable and phasing. Because phasing's really nice. And I think phasing in particular for Ball Lightning is really nice. Because I want to say, if you're standing inside the model of a monster, especially since like most of the bosses are large in the game, right? If you're standing inside the model, and I use the 20% Paragon AoE, but it seems like they just have 100% uptime. As opposed to like normally it like rotates around you, right? When you know this, you've played Ball Lightning, you've seen Ball Lightning or whatever. But like, as it rotates, like, if the mobs are on the other side of it, it doesn't do any damage, right? Whereas I think if you're standing inside of monsters, it doesn't. It will just hit them all the time. At least for the bosses. It's probably a lot of single target. To have phasing. Be a good reason to have boots. Otherwise I just use Esus. They give a lot of movement speed. They give crit. It's good. I have extra damage to vuln enemies while I have a barrier. Sork almost always has a barrier, at least while doing damage, just because of protection, right? You're a cooldown based rotation, you're spamming cooldowns, you should always have a barrier. They most of the time have vuln, so it's pretty good. I just have a bunch of stats on it. I would replace overpower here with int. Otherwise, like crit strike damage, vuln damage, and all that stuff, I think it's pretty much irrelevant what you have anymore. Just make sure you have something that does damage. Like you want mastery damage, lightning damage in all stats. Those things seem fine. My amulet is kind of insane, honestly speaking. The only thing that I would change about it is I want the movement speed higher. But I have movement speed, mana cost reduction, ranks of mastery for ball lightning, ranks of glass cannon for damage. I am currently using Slaughter, I guess is what the aspect is called, right? It's just to give me 20% movement speed in town, honestly speaking. It doesn't really work anywhere else. You get like a little bit of it as you're like running to bosses and all this, but most of the time this isn't active. But for town it's really nice. Otherwise, I would probably use either Disobedience, which will give you a significant amount of mitigation while doing sigils or bosses or anything of that nature, because like your armor's really bad as Sork, right? Like you have no physical mitigation. So I'd probably use Disobedience. Otherwise, I don't know. Pick one of the damage ones. There's a bunch of them. I personally, I've gone back and forth between using Umbral with a bunch of like CCs and using Prodigy, and I just like Prodigy more. But you need one of the two, right? Prodigy's, when you use a cooldown, you gain mana back. I'd never found a 25, but I think I used the 21 most of the time, and now I have a 23. It's fine. Otherwise, I have... The big things I have on this are Crit Strike Chance and Lucky Hit. Resource Generation, I think, doesn't really matter that much. I mean, it matters a little. Like, my mana regen's pretty fast. But, yeah. Otherwise, you just have damage sets. Crit strike chance in particular is really important, I feel. You have a lot of crit synergies, and crit strike chance just has a much higher, I don't know, affix value compared to damage mods, I feel. I use a blue rose. This is also just like the whole mana thing. It has a huge mana cost reduction modifier on it, 23%. And my ball lightning costs 28 mana. Ball lightning normally costs 45. When you're getting back, you know, 23 mana, 25 mana, whatever off prodigy, it might be a little more with resource generation. I'm not really sure how that works. I assume it increases that, but effectively my cooldowns give me back a ball lightning, whereas like if you don't have any mana cost reduction, it takes like 2 cooldowns to get back a ball lightning, right? But my pre-stack is pretty high in that regard. You also have mana cost reduction with upgraded flame shield. But that's those things. I guess I would show the tree. The tree's like very, very, very stock. The only thing that sometimes changes, I don't think I have this set up right now. No, I was using flame shield for the Nightmare Hundreds. Normally people do this. I was using chill for a little while, but once again, that was just like, there's some chill synergies as well as I was just trying to get staggers. But like, it's pretty stock just to have Arc Lash and Firebolt. You have a bunch of stun synergies, and stunning things is pretty safe. Some of your damage modifiers are stunned for when you're like just blitzing around Hell Tides or Nightmare Dungeons. Oops. Other than that, you just kind of go down the tree, right? Like, you never actually cast any of these, so you don't have any of their synergies. You have 1 point of Devastation. The main reason for Devastation is to get the Elemental Dominance. I don't really like Elemental Dominance. I feel like this is too many points, because you don't have 100% uptime on this, right? A lot of the times, and maybe this is just like a change of how I should play the build, but I spam too much to the point where I'm probably hovering below 50% mana a lot, and especially like I was talking about, like my mana cost is very low, right? Like my mana cost is 28. So a lot of the times after my initial pre-stacking, and the pre-stacking I do try to keep it above 50%, but like after the pre-stacking is done, I pretty much never have above 50% mana unless something has a reset, like either I'm moving from pack to pack and it resets, but even then you're only going to get like 2 or 3 of your 5 to 7 ball lightnings with this. That being said, you still need to put points early on, right? So like what else are you going to put in? You can put into Potent Warding early on, it's okay. You can put Chain Lightning synergies are okay. This gives you a little bit more Crackling Energy. Crackling Energy gives you a lot of mana. Honestly speaking, this is probably better. It's only better while you have Aspect up, or Unstable Currents rather. But I think this might actually have some merit. But I don't know. The build does too much damage to the point where this probably doesn't ever matter, but like from this to this. That's something I would consider instead of taking this, is taking these and like one of this. You go over here, welcome to Sork. You take 3 points Frost Nova, 3 points Flame Shield, 3 points Teleport for their synergies. Get Shimmering for damage reduction, Mystic for mana cost reduction for your pre-stack of Ball Lightning. And Vuln Frost Nova, because this is how you Vuln things. That's just how Sork works. You take 1 point of Elemental Attunement, because it can only proc every 10 seconds. It will proc every 10 seconds. You do enough hits, even with like Ball Lightning's incredibly low lucky hit chance modifier, right? So you're going to get 5% of 6% proccing, but it's still enough. You take all the Glass Cannon points, 3 of 3 obviously. I have a bunch of contribution elsewhere, but you just want to do more damage. We go down here. Now we're in Conjuration stuff. Align the Elements is okay, but realistically this is just leading up to the next 2 things. I think taking Align the Elements as 3 points is not the worst idea for higher Nightmare tiers, and maybe some bossing. But otherwise, you take Mana Shield, you're pretty much always going to have this up. Once again, like you're just funneling, you constantly are like recovering mana through cooldowns, burning it through Ball Lightning, like you're going to have Mana Shield up as long as you are fighting all the time. It's a very necessary source of damage reduction. Sork is very squishy. You take Protection, once again, you have Barrier synergies. You have a lot of damage sources that care about you having Barrier. And also, Barrier is just a really good way of not dying, right? Getting a 4k Barrier as you're like spamming through your abilities, it's really good. You take Lightning Spear so that you can get down to Invoke Lightning Spear. You have a few stun synergies. It's also just quite nice as you're going through Nightmare Dungeons. Packs ahead of you will get stunned. You don't have to really worry about it. Take intense crit, because once again, crit synergies. There are like two schools of thought here. You can either take this, which I like doing because you do have some synergies later on with overflowing energy, which reduces your shock skill cooldowns, so that you can fire off more lightning spears, get more crackling energy, get more stun procs, get more just damage output, as well as this resets quickly for cooldowns for prodigy. Or you can take ice armor instead as like your 5th ability, 6th ability, whatever you want to call it, right? And like mana regeneration's nice. It's not a non-existent stat. It is a good amount of your recovery is actual just natural mana regeneration, especially if you take resource regeneration or resource recovery on your rings. And then you can just pick whatever here. You probably always take mystical. Helps refresh your barrier. And then we head here. Mastery skills, your ball lightning build, take ball lightning. Surprise, surprise. You're taking wizard's ball lightning. This is kind of the magic of the build. The enemies hit at least 4 times by a cast of ball lightning. A crackling energy is formed. It's going to happen 2 times per cast. You take invigorating conduit here. The reason you take that is because this spawns. Ideally, all of your ball lightning spawn 2 crackling energies. 2 crackling energies equal 24 mana. For me, I've almost gotten it down to the point where 24 mana is a ball lightning. You consider it with mana regeneration, it pretty much is. Providing I'm hitting something enough to generate ball lightnings, I can just keep firing off ball lightnings. You do kind of have to like run around and pick up the crackling energies though. It's a little annoying. You have 1 point static discharge just because it's in the way, but it does give you a little crit synergy from our crackling energy. You take 1 point inner flame because you want devouring blaze. It gives you a bunch of crit strike damage. The reason you can take this is because you have the firebolt synergy. The enchantment here makes it so all your direct damage stuff burns things. It's just for this effectively. You can take some of the stuff down here if your damage is really low, or if you're playing a different build. You can take warmth in particular. Warmth is an incredible healing tool. But for the most part, Sork just uses it for devouring blaze because you need to fill out the tree anyway. We go down to the ultimates, your unstable currents, your prime currents. You can take Supreme Unstable Currents, but it's kind of unnecessary. The Unstable Currents don't, or the Crackling Energies rather, they don't really do enough damage to do this. And if you are full on Crackling Energy, you have to run directly over Crackling Energy. Whereas if you're not full, you can kind of walk near it and it'll pick it up. So ideally you do bleed off Crackling Energy. Then we go here, you have Coursing Currents, and then you can do like 1 of 2 things here. I was using Convulsion early on for bossing to get stagger procs. Like once again, I had all this like chill stuff, slow stuff, free stuff, stun stuff to build staggers on bosses. I did like Duriel and Lilith and all this stuff at level 77 originally. But most of the time you're going to take Conduction here. It just gives you a lot of movement speed. This is always up. You once again hit so often, you have plenty of crit chance. More movement speed is more clear is more experience, more loot. Electrocution, enemy struck, deal less damage to you for 5 seconds. Once again, Sork is very squishy. It's nice to have some other form of damage mitigation. Take a point of permafrost, not because you care about your frost skill damage, but because you care about hoarfrost. Once again, you have ways to give chill. You have ways to freeze enemies. Overflowing energy is your, what is this, key passive of choice. Your crackling energy hits 1 additional enemy, not really relevant. Once again, your crackling energy doesn't do that much damage. However, each time your crackling energy hits an enemy, your shock skill cooldowns are reduced by 0.1 second, increased to 0.25 seconds against elites. Again, you have teleport, it makes it so you can teleport around a lot. You have lightning spear if you're not using ice armor. This is effectively just another method of, it gives you a little bit of protection through the stun, but you're mostly using it for mana recovery. And then you have unstable currents, which is, you know, your I win button effectively. You cast this and then you just have a huge spray of lightning skills going around you. You do a ton damage. You feel great. The other option is Veers, but once again, you'd rather have cooldown recovery rate than what is arguably a better skill. But I don't know. You don't really need the damage. The damage reduction might be an argument for it, but a lot of the bosses sometimes have dangerous windows where they're not present to be damaged for you to reduce their damage. So, I don't know. Just always take overflowing energy. A Paragon board is, quite frankly, not good, but this is what it is. Early on, I just took all this stuff because I was just filling out a tree. I probably can get rid of resilience at this point, although I do like the life. You want to be taking pretty much every single source of percent damage on your tree. Is what I liked doing, but I don't know. It's kind of a glass cannon-y build. I have destruction. Your critical strikes increase the damage the enemy takes up to 12%. You hit a ton, they will instantly ramp to 12%. A good one. You also get a little bit of crit strike damage, which used to be much better, but now it's just whatever. Then I go into, I don't know what this thing is called. What is this tree? The Enchantment Master. I never really went to this thing. I don't think there's a merit for it. A lot of the times you're just, it's a very like binary, you're enabling something or not. It's not a like damage scaling aspect of your build. It's just, I want things to be burning, I want things to be chilled, I want fire shield to proc when I'm about to die. You're not scaling any of that stuff up, it's just a yes or no, right? So this isn't really necessary. But I just use it to get this. I have mastery skills, have 20% increased area. Once again, like ball lightning doesn't have perfect coverage. If you ever played PoE or something, like if you're used to Blade Vortex, and this is like a very similar style Blade Vortex build, it's different in that Blade Vortex will always hit everything around you, whereas this one has, you know, you can think of it as like a wheel spinning around you or something, or like a segment of a pie where it doesn't hit all around you. So having increased area will increase the time that they're hitting. Then I have Flame Feeder. Once again, you always burn things, so this is just a 10% damage multiplier. As well as, you know, increased damage to burning enemies. It's just generic percent damage. It's something you want. I have Elementalist. Dealing fire, cold, or lightning damage to an enemy increases the damage you deal to them by 5% for 10 seconds, stacking once per element. You have Frost Nova, you have burning damage, which I assume counts. And then, you know, the majority of your build is lightning. Also, Flame Shield is fire damage, so this should always be a 15% multi. I could probably get more use out of this elsewhere, taking advantage of the Paragon nodes within range for their non-physical damage modifiers and damage reduction modifiers are increased. But once again, mine's pretty like just slap hazard. I have Frigid Fate. You deal bonus damage to vulnerable enemies equal to 10% of your total amount of bonus damage with cold, up to a maximum of 30%. I have 16% apparently. Well, I have whatever that it works out to be. It's just another multiplier. So I took it, even though I'm not like very heavy into cold synergies. I do have cold damage enough floating that it's worth it to me. Take some damage. I took some nodes like this, Safeguard, where you just have damage reduction against elites, a little bit of armor. I think I have another one over here that's like damage reduction over time. Yeah. You're, like, once again, Sork is just squishy. You just need to be able to survive combat to the point where you can use... Like, you have a lot of recovery tools. You don't necessarily have life recovery, but you have enough barrier spam that you just need to be able to survive combats to get to utilize these things to keep the fights rolling. I didn't take this. It's Burning Instinct. Once again, like, most of the legendary nodes don't really help you, I have found. So you just kind of want to try to be maximizing your glyphs. This one's charged. Picking up Crackling Energy grants you 5% damage, 5 seconds up to 15. Once again, you are getting tons and tons and tons and tons of Crackling Energy constantly throughout fighting, as well as when you're running around. So this is always 15% multi. It's pretty good. The Crackling Energy damage multiplier looks really large, and it is, but once again, Crackling Energy just doesn't do that much damage. It doesn't even like really clear white mobs. I'm sure you could build in such a way that it does, but I don't see why you would, honestly speaking. And then I kind of want to work on Tactician, but I would have to redo my tree. Like, I'm a level 100. I'm obviously not getting more Paragons to fix this stuff, but... That's what my setup is, at least. It's very... haphazard, I guess. These are the vampiric powers I use. So these are the 4 that I always use, and then this one kind of gets swapped around depending on what I'm doing. I'm using Anticipation. Your ultimate skills have a 20% cooldown reduction. This is phenomenal for probably everyone in the game. There are some builds that don't use ultimates, but for the most part they do, and a 20% cooldown reduction as well as bonus to your ultimate skills based on damage over time is pretty good. Can I go over my setup? No Iron Fist. I take a Cursed Touch. You have a lucky hit chance of up to 44%. Once again, that's like 44% of whatever your skill's lucky hit chance. To inflict Vampiric Curse on enemies. Affected enemies have a 50% chance to spread to other enemies. Vampiric Curse's souls deal 200% increased damage. This is actually pretty nice. I'm mainly using it to proc Vampiric Curse for other abilities, but we can go over how you can replace this elsewhere and not necessarily have to be using this. But the Vampiric Curse explosions, they like send out little volatiles or whatever. I can showcase it real quick for people who haven't seen it.
Not ready yet.
If I could ever find them all. Or more mobs. It's these guys. Little running, exploding guys. They do a lot of damage. They're much more significant in World Tier 1, 2, and 3 than World Tier 4. But even in World Tier 4, they still do a lot of damage. Hey, what up, Swanson? I'm sorry you're not feeling well. As for my other vampiric powers, I use Ravenous. You have a lucky hit of up to 20% chance to increase your attack speed by 40% of your total movement speed for 6 seconds. Current bonus is 64.8%. It's pretty common while you're in combat with this build to be at 200%. Just from your movement speed boots or different synergies that give you extra movement speed. This is pretty strong. You know, you get 80% attack speed. It's not a small stat to have, especially just like generic attack speed. Yeah, Swanson hit the sauce a little hard. I take Prey on the Weak. You deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies, 16% multiplier, it's pretty good. Enemies are vulnerable while affected by Vampiric Curse from your other Vampiric powers. This is why I currently use a Cursed Touch. Although you have Frost Nova, that will give you, providing you space it out properly, gives you 12 seconds of vuln against bosses. Sometimes I don't space it out properly, sometimes I just used it beforehand, sometimes I get to the boss of a dungeon and it's not up at all. Just gives me another source of vuln. Vuln's a pretty large multiplier. You can see it's a 20% damage multiplier. It's not as powerful as it used to be, where it used to be, like 160% damage multiplier, 300% damage multiplier, but it's still significant. You always want enemies to be vuln. And then the one that I flip around is, I'm currently using Hemomancy. Hemomancy is used whenever I'm doing open world content, such as Hell Tides, the Vampire Zones, where the amount of damage it does, and even to an extent the healing, isn't very relevant. It's not very high. If I was a build that scaled physical damage, it might be more relevant. If I was a build that scaled life, if you're playing like, a big barbarian or a big druid or something, you might actually be able to just clear significant amounts of screens with this. But for what I use it for, because I don't actually have damage scaling with it, is it tags the mobs in like slightly over a screen's range, right? Like, so if there's like mobs beyond this corner of the screen, it will hit them. While it doesn't kill them, it does annoy them to the point where they'll run after me. This is very helpful in Hell Tides, in the Vampire Zones, when you're just doing like large open world content, maybe even in dungeons if you are trying to kill all the monsters along the way. It's just a nice way to pull monsters to you, so you don't have to run around quite as much. Other things that I swap it with every now and then is you can use Metamorphosis. When you evade, you turn into a cloud of bats, you become unstoppable for seconds, things take some damage, and they're afflicted by Vampiric Curse. As I was saying earlier, if you want Prey on the Weak's synergies without necessarily taking a Cursed Touch, you could just run Metamorphosis instead. I don't like Metamorphosis, simply because for some reason, Metamorphosis has some weird synergies and anti-synergies, or whatever you want to call them, where you can see here, these boots have evade grants you 75% movement speed for 3 seconds, right? So this is me running around. We can show it. I need to like get out of town or whatever. Or we can just show it here, it doesn't really matter. You see movement speed, and like I have 162% movement speed, but you would drop this amulet and then you go down to like 140 or whatever, right? But you evade, you go up to 200%. This is the cap, even if you have more, which I obviously do with this movement, goes away. If you have Metamorphosis. When you evade, you will not get that movement speed bonus at the end. And while this is a very powerful ability, having like, you know, pretty much on-demand unstoppable, like your evade has a 5-second cooldown, this has 4 seconds of unstoppable, you have a very large coverage of unstoppable, and I believe you can even use it while you're CC'd, so it's another like CC break. It was really annoying not getting the speed boost, so I dropped it. Otherwise, I would recommend it. It's very strong. You probably just replace a Cursed Touch with it. And then make sure you evade through bosses to give them Vampiric, to give you synergy with Prey on the week. I've used Undying before. It's actually a pretty significant amount of healing. Especially if you're doing the self-blood siphon in the Vampiric zones that drain you. It's a pretty good way to counteract it. Domination's okay. The problem I had with Domination is it doesn't work against bosses. It would if you stagger them. But typically with this build, you're not staggering them, you're just killing them. But that's always an option. You don't freeze bosses either, you just build their stagger. I used Feed the Coven very, very early on in hopes that the little lightning spear conjuration would do something, give me resources as well as damage, but it never really seemed to work out, so I dropped it. Infection is incredibly strong early on. I would recommend it if you're in World Tier 1 or 2. Maybe even to 3, but later on it kind of falls off because like you just don't scale poison damage. It doesn't do anything anymore. Even though you hit, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, it's still just not a significant amount of damage. What else have I used? I think that's really it. Yeah. Effectively, it's just I bring in Hemo anytime I'm doing open world stuff. Otherwise, I guess I use Sanguine Brace. Otherwise, I use Sanguine Brace. And this is just, like, once again, Sork's very squishy, and I don't have a way to get Fortify. There may be an elegant solution to Fortify, but this was just my solution. As you kill things, you get Fortify. While you have more Fortify than half of your maximum life, which is very easy to accomplish. Having Fortify, like actual Fortify where you are fully fortified, I guess it's called being fortified, is kind of hard. But having more than half your health is very easy, an 8% crit. Like, once again, you have a bunch of crit synergies. Crit is a very large damage multiplier. It's pretty important to be